Before we start our ball with tail assignment, let's do an exercise, and this is going to be part of your homework, is to turn in this exercise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come around. So I've referenced my tail version 1 rig in. So I'm going to come around behind, and what we're going to do is we're going to practice wagging the tail. So what I need to do is I need to make an easy button to have all these different tail controls selected, so I don't have to hold down shift and go click, 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 click all the way down his tail every single time I want to add a key to the tail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my shelves. There's my animation shelf. So I'm going to come, and there's this little gear icon right here, and I'm going to click on it, and it's going to say new shelf. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to call my shelf tail and hit OK. So now I have this nice blank shelf. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select my tail controls. I'm going to start from the base of the tail, and I'm going to hold my shift button and get 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now my entire tail is selected. So I'm going to come down here to the right hand corner of my screen and go to my script editor, which is this white box with a semicolon. And it's going to show me all the things I have done recently in the last few minutes. So the last 4 lines of code here is select the first tail control, the Kyrock 1, and 2, 3, and 4. So I'm going to highlight this line, 3, 2, and 1. So this is my tail right here, these 4 lines. So I'm going to go to File, Save Script to Shelf. I'm going to call this tail all, so I'm going to go tail underscore all. Hit OK. It will ask me if I want a Python script or a Mel script. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever. I'm just going to hit Mel. That's Maya's native language. Okay, so I'm going to close that. I'm going to click off onto the side. So look on my shelf, and there's my button, tail all. And if I click it, it selects his entire tail. So that's exactly what I wanted. So that's perfect. Frame 1. So with his whole tail selected, I'm going to hit E for rotation, and I'm going to set my first pose. So my first pose, I'm going to curl his tail. So I've got all 4 tail controls selected, and I'm going to curl it way up. I'm not going to hit him in the head, but curl it way up like this, and hit S. And then I'm going to come all the way up to frame 20, and I'm going to curl it the opposite direction and hit S. Okay, so right now we have a tail wag going. So I'm going to come, I still have my whole tail selected. So I'm going to come to frame 1, and I'm going to click the middle mouse button on the timeline and drag it all the way to frame 40 and hit S. So now I have a loop. So my tail goes left, right, left. So I'm going to go ahead and save my scene because I've just applied some animation. And go to scenes and call this tail underscore V1 for version 1. So let's look at our graph editor. So I'm going to go to animation editors, graph editor, hit A. So here's our animation so far. So what I am going to do is I'm going to turn my cycling on. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to make sure Infinity is turned on. There we go. And next, I'm going to go to Curves and Pre-Infinity Cycle and Post-Infinity Cycle. So now if I zoom out, you can see this tail swing kind of goes on forever. And if I play it, So his tail just swings back and forth forever. All right, so I'm going to go back to my graph editor. So I'm going to choose a point into the future. So I want a whole bunch of tail swings. So I'm going to go all the way out. So my very first key is on the trough of this curve here. So that's where I want to end up here. So it looks like for me 352. So if I go to my last frame and my first frame, that will make a perfect cycle. All right, so we've got 9 full swings of the tail. Okay, so Maya is doing all this work for me with the cycling, but I only have keys over here. I can't really do anything over here. Well, how can I fix this? How can I get Maya to make all the keys for me so I don't have to come in here and key it and copy these keys over and over? Well, what I can do is I can bake my curves. Y rotation is the channel I would like to bake. So I'm going to click Rotate Y. I'm going to use my Control button, click Rotate Y, come down, Rotate Y, and Rotate Y. So I've selected all of my Rotate Y channels, and that's what I would like to bake. So if you can't see them because they're all the same curve, if you want for a second, we can go to Stacked View. I'm going to hit F here. So in Stacked View, I can see, yes, I have 4 curves selected. That's perfect. So I'm going to go back to Absolute View. There we go, and I'll just hit A. So now I'm going to go back to Bake Channel, and I'm going to go to my dialog box, and I'm going to go, yes, use the time slider. So time slider's there, yes. Make sure that Sparse Curve Bake is on, and I'm going to say Bake. So now I'm going to zoom out, and you can see that these original 3 keys that I made, Maya has baked my channel and repeated the 3 keys all the way to the very end, and that's exactly what I want. If you do not hit Sparse Bake, Maya would have given me 352 keyframes. My entire timeline would just be bright red with keys on every single frame. We don't want that because we can't use it. It makes everything more difficult. All right, so we cycled our curve and we baked our curve, which means that we now have and swinging animation on all 4 tail controls all the way through our entire shot. So I'm going to go ahead and just save the scene as a new version because I've added to it. So I'm going to go tail version 2. So now I've got this tail that just swings to the end here. And now that we have all these curves baked in, we don't have to use infinity anymore. So I'm going to set my pre-infinity to constant and my post-infinity to constant, and I can also turn off my infinity. I don't need to see that anymore. So now all I've got is just this tail animation. Okay, so I'm going to make my character wag its tail and slowly come to a stop. So how am I going to do that? Well, each one of these is a wag. Okay, well, I want to make every swing incrementally smaller. So I'm going to leave my first swing as is, and I'm going to put a region tool around here, and I'm just going to pull this down a tiny bit and let that go. So leave that. Pull this up a tiny bit, let that key go, down a little bit, up a little bit, down a little bit, up a little bit. So I'm slowly decreasing these curves down to 0 because 0 will be stopped. Down a little bit, up a little bit, down a little bit. And then this very last key, we can just select it and type in 0. All right, so let's see, what does our animation look like now? All right, so it's swinging to a stop. So I'm going to go ahead and save it because we did a large chunk of animation here. So I'm going to call that tail version 3. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a few more frames on the end of our scene. So let's make this like 370 here. So now it's going to swing to the stop, and we have a little bit of time to see that it's stopped, so it doesn't just cut off suddenly. So now what we're going to do is we need to offset our curves, because right now everything swings and hits the pose all at the same time and then hits the next pose all at the same time. It's very mechanical. It doesn't look like a living thing because everything hits the pose all at once. And living things aren't like that. Living things, we have muscles, and the muscles pull, and it works its way down the different bones of a tail, and then the end of the tail lags behind everything else. So how do we offset this? So I'm going to pull out a little bit. Okay, so over here you can see our tail controls. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so 1 is the base of the tail, so it leads. So I don't want to have this selected anymore. So I'm going to hit Control and turn our first tail control off. So right now I have tail control 2, 3, and 4 selected. I'm going to leave the very first key where it is, and I'm going to select everything else. And we can get out of this tool by hitting Q. We don't need that tool on anymore. So I'm going to come to our left-hand status box, which is time, and I'm going to go plus equals 2. So operator equals 2, and this is going to shift all my keys over 2 frames. And you can see in the timeline that that's now offset. So I'm going to use my control button, and I'm going to let go of tail control number 2. So now I just have tail control 3 and 4. So I'm going to leave the very first frame where it is and select everything else and hit plus equals 2. And you can see it's offset again. So I'm going to use control and let go of tail control number 3. So now I just have tail control number 4. I'm going to leave the very first keyframe where it is, select everything else, and go plus equals 2. Alright, so hide that for a second and watch our animation. And now you can see that nice offset on the tail is starting to look more like an actual creature. So at any point we can come back in here, and maybe I want to select 3 and 4 again. Yeah, come in here and maybe we'll offset that a little bit more. So I can always just go plus equals 3. So now there'll be a big offset between the base of the tail and the end of the tail. And I can play my animation. So the more you offset the end of the tail, the more you're select to get these S curves. So now you can see that tail's really lagging behind now. And maybe I'll play with it a little bit more. Maybe I'll grab tail controls 2, 3, and 4. Plus equals 4. Now this big offset. So now we have a lot of offset on the tail. And you can see now it looks like a living thing and not a mechanical tail that hits 2 poses. Okay, so play around with different offsets, and remember if you offset it too much you may need to add a few more frames at the end. So you want, change to 375, so you want like 6 or 8 frames at the end with no movement so that your audience can see that the animation stopped right there. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as my final scene here, so version 4. So now I can come up to show and turn my NURBS curves off so it's just my creature, and I will go and go back to up to show for a second and turn my HUD off, so that takes away the camera name and our little compass there. And I'm going to go to Play Blast. So all of my settings for my last homework assignment will work. I'll just change the name of it to Tail Exercise. And Play Blast. You got that nice swishing tail. It looks just like a cat now. Alright, there we go. So you can turn in a Play Blast with your tail exercise and also turn in your Maya scene